Okay, well, this next video we'll talk about the, if I can find it here in front of me, where to put, oh, there it is. Okay, the lockback. And I did the video on how to adjust the lock on the liner lock. So we have here just a couple examples. These are customs, and it doesn't have to be customs, it could be anything. You get a lockback. That's the ones that you manipulate this way, and it has up and down play. Well, many people don't know it, but those can be adjusted very similar to the way we adjusted the liner lock, but only in certain circumstances. And what those would be if the lock bar itself is not hardened. Some makers, especially older knives, it was thought there by some at one time that that should be as hard as the blade, and that proved to be a bad idea in the end, because under certain shock stress situations, that little lock latch that we rely on would just shear right off of there when it was that hard. And so now most of them are softer. This one is a softer lock bar, and this is the same maker. This is Dick Atkinson. Dick made a lot of older style folders back in his day. He's no longer making knives now, but this one has a lock bar that's not hard. This one is hard. And how do you know it's hard? Well, besides the fact that I tested it and know it's hard, I could tell beforehand, and the way I could tell was by this here. Listen here. This is this knife opening that doesn't have a hard lock bar. Okay, that's a normal click, just like you'd expect to hear from any other folder. It could be the triad lock. Okay, just a lock click. Okay, well, when it's not a softer bar than the blade, what you get is a ping. Listen. You hear that? Let's do it again. Ching. Okay? It might sound pretty to some people. I've heard guys say, you know, I really like that ching it makes. Well, when I hear that, what that tells me is that they hardened the lock bar. Probably not a good idea. So in the case of a hard lock bar, particularly if it's as hard as this one, which was as hard as the blade, you're not going to try to peen that lock to make that contact a little tighter. On one like this that's hardened to a spring hardness, or somewhere thereabouts, 50 Rockwell, something of that nature, well, in those cases you can get away with a couple of hash mark peens right on the side of each one that squishes material forward, just like it does when you do a liner lock, only it's a lockback. And if you look on certain older knives in particular, some of the Japanese knives coming out of various places, Seki, Japan, the handcrafted knives that were made for various, you know, the Schrade, the upper, what they call them, it wasn't champagne, but they had a name that they gave the premium knives, and those were handcrafted, and sometimes you'd see a lot of that handcrafting art where they fine-tune the knife before it left, where instead of leaving the factory with that little bit of click, there was a maker there that was going over it, and if it needed a little adjustment, you know, that's what it got. And you can see those on some of the knives. I've got knives in my collection. Parker Frost, some of the early ones when he was trying to impress people, those were handcrafted by individual makers in Japan, as I understand it. And the same way with some of the early prototypes and other things that were being done to try to start a new company, when you'd see something getting on the ground floor. So, you know, these adjustments are not uncommon. They're less needed today, so we don't see them, because the CNC machining robots and whatnot, you know, I mean, my God, when they can make this kind of quality and reliability to where you can take one of these knives apart, put it back together, using the parts of another knife that's the same model and still have two working knives. And you couldn't do that just a few years ago. It was uncalled for. They were the same, but they oftentimes they had individual tendencies. And to this day, you can't just swap a Delica 4 liner or a Delica 4 lock bar without swapping the blade with it. And it's best, if you do swap those things, to keep those things together, because these are mated parts, really. And so even if I was doing a swap myself for one of my knives, I would make sure to include the blade and the lock bar together when you swap them. I'm not saying they won't fit and they won't work the other way. They can, but it's unlikely they're going to work as well or be as trustworthy. I think that that's all I wanted to cover on this video. I'm trying to think if there was anything else that I wanted to say before I closed off. I think I covered just about all of it on the lock adjustments. I should have covered this in the liner lock video. I apologize, but it didn't occur to me till after it was over.